Can anybody hear me?
Oh, you know what? It's this.
I can hear you now.
Yeah, it's the cord. I
Okay.
wasn't sure. Okay. You know, we're here. Okay, with the
Yay!
blessings. All right. This is I'm so sorry, y'all. I really had thought that we were going to get through this with minimal technical difficulties because I was prepared. I've been sitting in my office for the past 2 hours trying to make sure everything was right. And then you get on and it's like, wait.
It's okay.
Okay. So today, can we see this? The camera's here. I really love this book cover too, and I wanted to talk about the publishing because I wonder if you had gone with a is it considered like a major publisher if they would have allowed this type of book cover?
You know,
Because I
I
love
don't
it.
know. That was not my choice. Like I didn't I have what's called consultation on the cover,
Yeah.
but I did not have approval.
Oh.
And a little secret is I didn't love it at first.
Oh. I
I
got it.
didn't. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. But
It
now it's become like almost iconic because people have been cosplaying it and recreating it, and it did what it came to do. But I have to give props to West Virginia University. That was their vision.
because I really didn't know what to expect, and I
Yeah,
saw everyone
yeah.
sharing the book, and this actually looks like somebody I know from Ghana.
Hmm. Okay.
She looks like her name is Amma to me. And I was like, wait, The Secret Life of Church Ladies. I keep hearing about this book. Let me get into it. And I'm like, you just don't know what
Right.
to expect. And I think there
Yeah.
would have been, I don't know, I just imagine that had a different publisher got a hold of this, it would have
Yeah.
been like the Dear Sisters would have been on the cover.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that for the UK version, they have a completely different cover, and I really love it. And I think everybody's going to love it
Okay.
too.
I can't
So
wait
I'm
to
not
see
going to give
it.
away any more secrets, but they have a whole, so the it's coming out in hardcover in the spring of 2022. And then the paperback will be out. This is all UK version in 2023 with a brand new cover. So that works. It doesn't, it's not Dear Sisters on the cover.
Okay, I'm definitely very excited to see
Yeah.
this. All right, well, let's give you a proper introduction. You know what's funny? I watched a bunch of interviews, and I'm always skeptical. Like, will I remember how to pronounce someone else's last
Oh,
name?
Deesha Philyaw. It's fine.
Philyaw. We have a Philyaw in the book club. I wonder if y'all are
Oh,
related. Yeah, Adir and
okay.
Philyaw. I
Probably.
know Adir because Adir is one of the people that engages. So like I know, and I've been meaning to be like, are y'all cousins or something? But
Right.
All right, so this is the author chat for The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. This is the book I've been telling everybody to read. I'm sure a bunch of our members will be reading after this because nobody believes me when I tell them this was a very easy, enjoyable. I don't care if you're stressed out, if life is hectic, this is the book to either read or get on audiobook. So I've read it and I've listened to it twice.
Thank you.
Because the first time I listened to it, I was like, did I miss it? Because I went through it so fast. I mean, it's only a 4.5 hour listen.
Yeah.
And I was so engrossed. I was like, I know I missed some details. So in order to prepare for this, I went back and listened. And, there's so many ways to fall in love with the book.
Thank you.
So we're really excited for all the success that's come for you from this book. We're excited to see it in production.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, but this is the book that like everyone's like, I'm looking for something to read. I'm like, this is it. This is the book to read. Get into it. Cause it's like it's easy, it's fiction, so it's not too heavy, but it also hits on just so many themes. There's so many
Mhm.
ways to fall in love with it. There's so many thoughts that can come from there's so many conversations. So if you wanted to critically engage with the book, if you wanted to have a hey girl, hey moment,
Yes.
you can have all those experiences. It's just up to you as a reader to decide how you're gonna experience the book. So
Mhm.
I'm a fan.
Thank you for that.
So let's get into these questions that were
Okay.
submitted by the SVG community. So thank y'all for helping to make this a really good author chat. And we got a ton of questions about the formatting of the book
Sure.
because that's what hits everyone first, how the
Yeah.
stories end, how you pick the progression, yada, yada,
Mhm.
yada. So how did you pick the order of the short stories?
So I knew that Eula should be first because one, for sentimental reasons, because it was the first story that was published elsewhere. And when I knew I was building a collection, my agent had given me the kind of homework assignment of getting 3 stories published. And then we would go to market with it with a partial manuscript based on those three stories. And so when we did go to market, I had 3 stories published and 3 others completed. So it was originally 6 stories in the partial manuscript. So Eula, that was kind of like my first child, so I was like, it should be first for that reason. But also with Eula, I think it just tees you up for what comes next in the other stories. It hits on all the themes. It's, I think, one of the most provocative stories in the collection. It's one of the most sexually explicit stories in the collection. So it's like readers will know right up front, like, this is what we're doing. I hope you ride with me, let's go. And it's not like it builds, it sort of starts there. It's jarring for some readers. But from what I hear from a lot of people, they keep going, even though they're kind of, surprised by Eula. Then I know I wanted to end the collection the way that I kind of end the stories. And people ask a lot, how do you know when you're done? How do you try and end? And I always try to end with a sigh, which can be a number of things: relief, frustration, revelation, satisfaction. But it's like I know it when I feel it. It's hard to explain. And the story that felt the most like a sigh was Eddie Levert. When Eddie Levert comes, that felt like a sigh. So that felt like it should be at the end. The last story I wrote in the collection was Instructions for Married Christian Husbands, but it didn't feel like a sigh for the collection,
Yeah.
So I didn't want that one to be last. So then when I had my bookends, it was like, okay, I got 7 stories left. And then it was more sequencing around emotion and length. I didn't want super long stories back to back, and I didn't want super heavy stories back to back if I could avoid it. So then I just sort of structured, that middle that way. It was a little less scientific than the beginning and the end.
Okay. Well, you already answered our next question,
Mhm.
but it was interesting because you say aside, because I was watching earlier today your interview with Kiese Layman for
Mhm.
Greenlight Bookstores, and
Yeah.
he was talking about like how it's like your book is like it's a revelation. Like
Oh.
every chapter is a revelation. He was telling you,
Mhm.
and so it correlates because I think people kind of question, and we do have a question about what was the process in deciding how to end the stories.
Mhm.
Because for the initial people, it is kind of jarring. I mean,
Yeah.
you do open with a big bang, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of
Literally.
us, regardless of like our spectrum of our sexuality,
Mhm.
have elements of Eula that we deeply relate to,
Yeah.
and then you want to know more because
Yeah.
you kind of want the story to tell your story. You want to,
Yeah.
how do you deal with these things? How do you deal with these
Mhm.
thoughts? And then you kind of just you do read it out, but each it ends. Some of them, I think on my first listen, I was like, oh, this does kind of feel like it ends abruptly. But then when I went back, it was like, no, but
Mhm.
like, do these stories need to end? Like, do our stories end?
Right. And I think a lot of them end with questions as well, questions that are unanswered or unresolved. And one, that's just kind of how life is, we don't always sort it out. And also, as much as possible, I wanted to stir up questions more than I wanted to give answers necessarily. And so, with Eula and Caroletta, we don't know, if they're going to make it another year, or who's going to give up on whom, if, or will they just keep doing that until they die, or until somebody gets married. Also with Jael, is Granny going to, snitch on
Mm.
her grandbaby, how does that end? And so each one was different for me. Dear Sister ends with that PS, grandma wants to know if you're pregnant. I knew that was my last line before I knew the middle. I knew the
Okay.
beginning, and I was like, this is how the story ends. And I felt like I was writing towards that kind of moment. That felt like a sigh to me.
I loved listening to that story
Mhm.
because you're listening to the person read it, though you never get to identify who the reader is.
Yeah.
So everything's kind of being told to them. And I'm like, I just love the narrative
Oh,
of this
Janina
experience.
Edwards, she was just perfect for it. People sent in audition clips, And that with the audio publisher, I did get approval on who the narrator would be.
Yeah.
And when they sent Janina's over, I was like, this is the voice I hear in my head when I'm writing. This is her. This is it. She was just perfect.
You did great. I in your interview with Kessa, you also mentioned that you were going to teach a master class and that you thought you were going to focus. Did you end up teaching that class?
Oh gosh, that was a while ago. I've taught several, so I don't know which
Okay.
one I was
You were
talking.
saying in the interview that you were thinking about teaching the class because it was up to you, and you were going to teach it on the endings of each chapter of your book.
Oh yeah, I have not done that. I've taught some other master classes. Like I'm getting ready to teach one on writing flash nonfiction about sex and flash fiction
Ooh.
about sex. So flashy sex is what it's called.
All right, can we take
But
these
no,
classes?
yeah, that one's it's called A Public Space.
Okay.
And
I'm in
that's
grad school, but for the rest, someone take it for me, and then
yeah.
I'll come back around to it. I was looking at the night school in Durham up here, and I was like, "Girl, you already in school. You don't need to be taking nobody's more
Just
classes for
yeah.
anything." But is Dear Sister your favorite ending?
Yes, Dear Sister is my favorite ending. Yeah, it's just like it feels so right.
Is there a deeper meaning in how any of the stories end, and like how so this was a question from the audience about is this like how the narrative of Black women is left unfinished? And when you were speaking earlier, I was thinking, what is the Zora Neale Hurston quote about some days are for questions and some days are
Oh
for
yeah, some years answer and some
years?
years
Yes.
ask. I wish I was being that deep. I was not. But I do think it's more that sometimes we have more questions than answers, and that very often it's not that neat. And I want people to sit with the questions, and particularly the questions of why do we do the things we do, and also why haven't we done some of the things that we want to do. And so we see the characters grappling with those things. And what I do hope is that Black women will see, like, you can ask these questions. You could try something different. You can let something go that you've been wanting to let go, but afraid to let go. You can grab hold of something that you've been afraid to grab hold of. And what if I do this? And that's what I want people to ask. What if I were to get free? What if I were to take these steps towards more freedom? What would that look like?
I mean, I think the book also makes me feel like, it's okay to be complicated, that we are complicated,
Right.
and that there's, none of these stories are necessary. I mean, Jael's got a little bit high jinks, but like, there is a certain sort of like mundaneness to all the stories, that people just living the lives that they can live and making choices within that reality.
Yeah.
But it's still, it's like, oh, to get this interior, to get this vulnerable viewpoint of it is really engrossing. Um, so in your interview also with KSA, you said you didn't intend to write about the church, but to write
Yeah.
about dissatisfaction.
Yeah, dissatisfied women, because I was one at the time when I started writing. But I was also writing from memory and sort of wedding memory and imagination. And it was the women that I had grown up with, church women and women outside of church, that kind of loomed large in my memories and my nostalgia, because I was very curious about their lives, also very curious about their sex lives, even when I was, young myself. And so when I started mining my memories, for things to write about, I thought of these women, and I started giving my dissatisfaction to them. And then now that at that time I was an adult, I could sort of imagine their lives more, and the questions I had about their lives that I dared not ask when I was a child. I could sort of intuit like what some of the, how it might be for them, because I knew how it was for me. And I grew up in the church, and I did things, the way that the church teaches you're supposed to, get married before you have children, you get married heterosexually. And it was like, but I wasn't happy. I wasn't satisfied. But I wasn't confident enough to write about myself at that point as nonfiction. So I gave that dissatisfaction to those church women to go with the dissatisfaction they probably already had. And everybody was just dissatisfied. And so over time, though, as I grew as a writer, I knew how to use more creative writing techniques, and be more imaginative, and play with form, and not be didactic, and it wasn't so much just it's like the what and the so what. Okay, so the what is they're dissatisfied. So what? Dissatisfied about what? And what are you going to do about it? And how does that play out? And what if they get happy? What if they don't get happy? So going deeper, was part of my, my growth as a writer, was to learn how to start in that place of dissatisfaction, and then, create something that would be engrossing, as well as that would spark conversations between people in church, out of church, mothers and daughters, conversations with ourselves.
Yeah. I want to come back to the dissatisfaction,
Okay.
because I have a thought about the way you wrote that in an accessible way, because I'm
Yeah.
thinking of like Salt Eaters and
Hmm.
Brewster Place, this canon of
Yeah.
like Black women literature that does kind of write about the dissatisfaction. But
Hmm.
I want to move to these questions because there's a question
Okay.
further down that comes back to this thought.
Okay.
We have two questions about the nerve. How about, did you potentially feel nervous either
Hmm.
about Black church's response
Hmm.
to this book, which is rooted in the experience of church women, that was, and it's very honest about
Hmm.
sexuality? And were you nervous about any of the stories that you thought might not be well received?
By the time I knew that the book was going to be a collection, it was like, well, the horse is out the barn now. This is a
Well,
fine
this
time
is
to
for
start worrying
me.
about what church folks are going to say. Um, but so the thought crossed my mind, but I didn't let it influence how I direct and honest I want it to be. But I think what I did, rather than worry about it, was kind of just make peace with it. Like, this isn't a book for everybody. Just like there are books that I don't like, or they're not, I prefer to say it's just not for me,
Yeah.
um and I'm okay with my book not being for everybody, not even for every Black woman, but I felt like, you know what, it'll find its readers, and I hope that for the Black women who want it and need it, it'll be what they want and need, that they'll feel seen and heard. For the Black women who are like, this is not for me, you know, I that's fine, I think that we're not entitled to good reviews. We're not entitled to an audience. I hope to, my goal was to earn an audience. If I could write these stories as honestly as I could and as best as I could, that it would find the readers, the Black women, but also I knew people who aren't Black women could connect to these stories as well.
I love that. I wanted to talk about the timelessness
Okay.
of this book because I think that's what I love about it most. About it, to me, as a person born in the 80s, I'm like,
Mhm.
I get a lot of the cultural notes about
Yeah.
this being a woman that's older than me. She was definitely a young adult in the
Yeah.
90s. There's all these references, but it
Mhm.
also just still feels like so relevant to today,
Yeah.
that people can read this who, weren't born until the early 2000s and
Mhm.
still very much so connect to all
Mhm.
the elements of this book. And that's why when you're thinking about dissatisfaction,
Yeah.
like when I'm thinking about some of the authors that I would relate you to, I also
Mhm.
think that they are a little bit more complicated to read.
Mhm.
And you did a really good job of hitting the same themes and same notes, and you know uh the just illuminating like the mundane, which is something that I really love that like Toni
Mhm.
Morrison does. But I also feel like this book is just so easy for people to open up and read.
Mhm.
I don't know if
Yeah.
you have a thought on that. This me just keep
Yeah,
talking.
I mean, I think it's partly because of all of the watching and listening I did of older women, right? And so I got that, and I was raised in a household by my mother and my grandmother. And there was a point where my great grandmother lived with us. So at one point there was 4 generations of us in the house. That was a lot.
Yeah.
And then I have daughters also. And so my life has always been this, saturated with women across generations, listening and learning and loving and parenting and being parented. And so I think that shows up because when I write, the conversations, I'm remembering things that I heard, and I remember how people spoke. I remember how they cooked. I remember how they handled different situations. And so I'm hoping that it's the authenticity of writing these women not as types or like the Black woman. I would be thinking about women I knew, or thinking about myself or my daughters or my mother, and I think that that's what makes it easy to enter into the world of the stories. And I love that interiority, like I have to really work at making like scenes and talking about the city and I'm like, nah, let's just get them in the car and they're having sex in the car. Like their
Not
world is
Daniel.
this big. Yeah, And so that just appeals to me, to like I'm literally all up in their grills.
But I
Like,
love that because it's so vulnerable, right? Like Matt
yeah,
Daniel is it's one of the shorter of the
yeah.
short stories, right?
Hmm.
But you still get so much from that experience and from, she's sleeping with the married man, but both of their parents, they're caretakers at this point. They're
Hmm.
going through this process of grief. This is their
Yeah.
moment of relief. Like, there's just so many conversations to have from like this
Hmm.
really short story, and it doesn't take place anywhere outside of the hospital parking lot.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's what I like. I like these small spaces, these really intimate spaces. And then I think that maybe helps the reader orient right away. You come right into the car with them.
Okay. I think the actual question that I wrote that sounded way better than how I said it was, can we talk about mastering how you crafted these timeless stories while still honoring the authenticity of the culture? That was a lot of words. I still got it
No,
across.
I love the question.
You still did that. I think it was a snowfall for me that I was like, okay, I'm getting all these cultural references that
Because
are
I'm a pop culture nerd, like, and I was born in 1971, so that whole span, and I was a latchkey kid, so I watched all the television. I didn't watch a lot of television. I watched all the
all of
television.
it.
I don't watch as much TV now, though. And but at the time, so much of pop culture was just day to day life for me, so it shows up just like the church ladies do.
Oh,
You're fading out a little bit.
hold on. I didn't
I
even
think
touch.
you're back.
Okay, it came back.
Yeah.
So grief is a common thread in the stories,
Mhm,
giving normalcy. Grieving is grieving normalcy, grieving the past, grieving so many different things and people in different ways.
mhm.
And did COVID and the global grief change any of the stories? Did anything shift for the characters between editing and publication?
No, because, I turned in my manuscript in exactly a year before it came out, September 1st, 2019.
Seems
So
so
they
long ago.
were I know, right? But they were baked, pre-pandemic, and then, we did some editing, but the bulk of the editing was done, before we were in pandemic. And even early in the pandemic, we didn't know, remember, for a long time, we thought, oh, it's just going to be shut down for a few weeks.
Uh,
But at the so by the time, the times when I would have been able to go in and do any kind of significant editing, those were more innocent times. We had no idea what was about to happen. So no, I can't say that that those stories have been influenced by the pandemic, but certainly the writing I've done last year and this year that writing has definitely been influenced by my experience of the pandemic.
yeah. Uh, we have this next question. I really loved the question, and it was submitted by the community, and I
Mhm.
loved it because I brought this book up to my therapist, and I was talking about the How to Love a Physicist.
Yeah.
So he was talking about sense of self and how as children, like think we get this messaging and we get
Mhm.
separate from our sense of self.
Yes. Mhm.
And I was like, in How to Love a Physicist, it's really about how to love yourself.
Yes.
It's how to
Yes.
find yourself. And I was like re-listening to this and I was like, yeah, I got work to do. But this
Oh.
question is, this book is full of messages Black women received through childhood.
Mhm.
And how
Mhm.
can we reimagine some of the toxic messages Black girls
Yeah.
received in the book?
And I think this goes back to what an earlier question, which was, what thinking about Black women in specific, and how some of the stories end. I think it's the same thing, that the power of the story is almost like less is more, because, how many people have preached self-esteem to us and self-respect and all of those things. But we are less likely to listen to someone talking at us than we are to listen to a story. Feels less threatening because the story doesn't know our secrets, only we do. And there's this like personal relationship that we have to the story that unless we tell somebody, they don't know how we're connecting with the characters and when we see ourselves or when we see our mothers. And so I think stories are just a powerful way and just have a lot more power than someone, even sometimes more than our therapist. And so I love that you talk to your therapist about it. I've heard from people, I told my therapist about this book, or my therapist told me about this book,
No,
you
because
know?
it's really good. It's like a self-reflection. Like there's
Yeah,
so many ways you might not have lived that same life as these
right,
characters, but you get such an interior perspective that there's ways to see yourself or see your,
right.
in How to Love a Physicist, and she's like, I stopped wearing the girdle, and her
Yeah,
mom, the first thing is like, how dare you walk? And then
yes,
a lot of us have had that experience,
yeah,
wearing
yeah,
tights and slips as children, and like I don't even
yeah.
own a slip anymore. So
I mean, but so think about it. It's like, you just like you wouldn't, we chafe at our mother saying you got to wear that girdle. If somebody was like, if you really want to be free, if you really want to be a feminist, if you really want to be grown in your own person, you can't be wearing a girdle. And that's terrifying.
Mhm.
But if you read about that in the context of this other person's journey, then in our own time and in our own way, we now have a blueprint. Like, I'm not there yet, you know, but maybe one day I could stand up to my mom. Maybe one day I can push back on these teachings from the church and from other people that don't serve me anymore. Look at how she did it. And it's not like this man came and showed her how. He was the catalyst, but the work was hers. He supported her, but the work was hers. But what do we get normally? We get preached at,
Mhm.
you can't be doing things for a man or just because of a man or whatever. You got to love yourself first. You got to do that. And all of it, the things that we need to hear and the things that we don't need to hear, it's people talking at us. And we tend not to be able to process it because maybe it's not the right time for us. And so with the stories, we can take our time, we can see somebody else, and we can see that potential for ourselves. And that's what I hope the stories would do, that nobody felt like I was telling them, you got to leave the church or you can't wear your girdle anymore. Wear your girdle if that's what you want to do. It's really not about the girdle, obviously.
Yeah.
But whatever the thing is that's holding you back from being at home in your own body, whatever that is, you deserve to be free of that. And that's what I hope people will take away, that Black women will take away more than, Deesha thinks, we should all be out here without the shapewear, like this.
Yeah,
I wish wear it. I sometimes do, I sometimes don't.
yeah, and I love the theme of difficult mothers.
Yes, there's
Especially in Snowfall, and thinking about like how we define home
mm-hmm.
and how we might project our own, how we've come to
Yeah.
conclude our relationships, and how we can just be more, give more grace and give more care to people that
Mm-hmm.
are working through it. Like thinking a lot about how when we either how we've been a friend, a sister, a lover to
Mm-hmm.
other people that are still working through holding
Mm-hmm.
on to something that we might think they need to let
Yeah.
go of.
Yeah.
I love the crabs, and I'm allergic,
Oh
but
yeah.
I love that scene.
Love it. Love it. I'm just looking here at something Tanisha said, that because the church teaches happiness comes in salvation. That's a really important point too, that in the stories, the message over and over is that you can be happy now. We don't have to be long suffering and then we get our reward in heaven. That is what the church teaches, and it allows the church as well as individuals to take advantage of Black women.
Hmm.
If we're not supposed to expect to be happy, to be at home in our bodies, to have pleasure, to be at peace, to rest. Like, no, 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 no. You get all of that later. So, I mean, it's the best con, right? Like, you're going to get all of it later. Just be selfless now and do what everybody else wants you to do. Follow the set of rules and you'll get the reward later. And it's not like you can come back and be like, wait a minute, I didn't get you're gone. It's too late.
Yeah.
And so it's a big commitment to ask people to postpone their happiness. So yeah, that's definitely something that I hope women take away from this, is that you deserve all the things now, right now.
Now, I was thinking of a history book we just read. I'm not going to get into it because it's boring, but it was talking about how women were led, like Puritan women were led to like that, the Christianity that came to America told women that they were automatically the sin.
Yes.
the
I
sin
mean,
within their being.
it goes even further back. If you study the church fathers, the people who came after Jesus and who were writing, their teachings were in the Old Testament. So many of them had these anti-woman views, and some of them were actually what we would consider call now promiscuous. And then when they rejected that, and now you know how it is when you go from being a whore to a saint, all of a sudden it's like the filth. But for those
Disgusting.
for those
But you
men,
know it so intimately, that's why you can castrate it so well.
exactly, and for those
Mm.
men, then the woman as a whole, they rejected sex, and it had to be this very confined thing. Like, Paul was like, well, if you must deal with women, I guess you should marry them, but that women were dirty and women were the root of all evil and all of those other things that, so even foundational, women are positioned as lesser and dirty. But Jesus didn't treat women that way. That's the thing. Like, but don't start me to preaching. So
No, what? Enjoy it. Let me enjoy it. Let me get back to your questions. Because, speaking of the Bible, and to
Mhm.
your last point, also, it's, in early America, it was the religious leaders who were the literate ones. They were the ones
Yes.
that kept the records. And so
Yeah.
when you get to early America and then you get to Black women,
Mhm.
we're ingrained in that belief that the sin is within us.
Yes.
And so,
Yes. And that's why the epigraph to my book I was so excited when I found it. It's an excerpt from a poem by Ansel Elkins called The Autobiography of Eve. And
mm,
it says, I didn't fall from grace, I leapt to freedom. Just reframing that narrative and that perspective from a woman falling from grace, which is what we've been taught, to a
mm,
woman leaping to her freedom.
yeah.
And how it's the same action but viewed in two different ways.
So is Jael leaping to her freedom? Can we talk about the influences behind Jael? It's a biblical name where a
Yeah.
woman, Jael, kills
Mhm.
Sisera to free Israel from the troops
Yeah.
of King Jabin. Jabin.
Yeah.
I ain't been in church in a very long time, so sorry if
Yeah.
I pronounce some names.
No.
But yeah, it's a woman that saved Israel by killing a man. And
Yeah.
Jael in the chapter named after her
Yeah.
took
So,
a turn so quick.
yeah, so I didn't know I knew she was gonna be tough and bold. Jael was a bit of like a revenge fantasy because like a lot of Black girls growing up, we dealt with sexual harassment, being preyed on by sexual predators in our community, and a lot of us suffered in silence, or even when we did speak up, we didn't get justice. I mean, look how long it's taken for R. Kelly's victims to get justice, and we still don't know exactly what that's going to look like.
Mhm.
Um, but in this story, she fights back. She fights back. And I was struck by the Bible story when I first read it, which was many, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, because it's so violent. And it's the only instance I know of a woman in the Bible committing a violent act. And not only, and so, her action had this larger ripple effect, but that was very personal. Like if you ever talk to a police or a detective, they will tell you shooting somebody is one thing, stabbing somebody is personal. And she nailed his head to the floor. That was real personal, right? And so I just was struck by such personal violence on behalf of a woman, enacted by a woman in the Bible. So I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this story, but I'm going to save it. And then later, when I went back to it, was like, well, what if there was a child? What if there was a Black girl who had this name? Who would name a child that? And what would the kind of implications be? And so I knew the biblical Giles story. And I started with this girl and her great grandmother who had named her, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And so you, for those who have read the story, I'm trying not to give too much of a spoiler. Her decision to commit that crime, if you consider it a crime or you consider it justice, however you want to look at it, was made as I was in the moment writing it.
Mm.
And I literally felt like I had just killed somebody myself. Like I caught, I lost my breath over it. Because murder is murder. But it felt right. It felt right. And then I was like, we'll just see what happens.
Yeah.
And so, I ask people in book clubs all the time. I was like, if you knew Jael, if she was in your life and she confided in you that this is what she did, would you turn her in? And
No.
everybody says no.
No.
But
No.
you ask the average person, if there was a murder and you knew, most of us would think that we would snitch. But, if it was murder of somebody in our
I mean,
community,
I think there's some accountability,
yeah,
not in a carceral state, like, because
right.
did she have to kill him?
Yeah,
I don't think death was the answer in this situation,
right. But
but
she's 14 and we're impulsive at 14. Shit, we're impulsive at
why
24.
is it I wanna call her I grew up with my great-grandmother as well in the house.
Okay.
I wanna call her Nana because too many syllables to say great-grandma, but why is the Nana reading the journal? Why are you invading the child privacy like that? Why are you upset she don't like your crab leg?
They stay focused on the wrong things. Like, this girl is literally, these girls are being victimized by this predator, but Granny is focused. Well, that girl, Cashel, is just fast, and it's the same thing when people in the church will be like, God told me that you out here not living right and and you're being fast away. How come God never tells them that these girls are being molested? Why
Mhm.
is that? God only seems to talk about the things that we like to, wag our finger at, but like, why can't God tell you things that could protect a girl
But
rather than
this
condemn a girl?
this is an experience that, especially Black children have
Mhm,
had, especially when they like, when Kiat stays heavy, he has that scene where he goes to his grandmother, or his
mhm.
grandmother, he writes a letter and she's like, I'm just gonna pray on it.
Yeah,
Like there's so many books that I can think of
yeah.
where these scenes have happened where the
Mhm.
elder finds out something and
Yeah.
doesn't want to, because like, oh, that's the
Mm-mm.
devil. That's just the
Mhm.
devil working. And it's no, that's humans. And
Yeah.
you have the means and the power to stop it. But you
Yeah.
know,
And so we've got, as I said, I have 4 generations in the book. And like, two of the, the older generations, they were raised to not talk about these things, to be silent. And then you've got the generations that came after them that are like, no, we want to talk about this.
yeah.
And talking about this is how we heal. And so you've got a built-in, intergenerational conflict.
Yeah, that is me and my Nana, who definitely was like, "You talk too much," and I'm like, "Sis, you grew up with like 3 kids.
Oh,
Come on, talk to me
has
about
anybody ever told a man they talk too much?
it." I was like 8, and she's like, "You just always asking questions," and I'm like, "Yeah, you were born in
Yeah, I mean,
1904. I got
you
questions."
you mess around and ask questions that reveal the double standards, that reveal the hypocrisy, and the whole idea is that you're supposed to not question. And this whole concept of having a blind faith, and all it does is perpetuate the status quo. Again, it's a fantastic con because at every turn where people could subvert the system, there's something, they've
Mm.
got a, what is it? There's an app for that. They got an answer for that.
Okay, so the next question is, oh, I already know the answer to this because I
Mhm.
watched a few of the interviews and I think this comes up consistently. But the
Okay.
narrator from the Instructions for Married Christian Husbands, are they the same narrator from Peach Cobbler? And if
Mhm.
so, why did you make that decision?
Yeah. So yes, Olivia is the narrator in both of those stories, and I talk about endings, right? So the original ending to Peach Cobbler took her from being a teenager, fast forward to like, 16 or so years. She's an adult. She's got this bakery. She's closing up for the night one night, and Trevor comes in. So now they're adults, and he confides in her that he knew that their parents were having an affair.
Hmm.
And so then she takes him in the kitchen. They bake a peach cobbler while it's in the oven. They have sex. I thought that was beautiful. It was just
You were actually going to give us an
wonderful.
ending.
Yeah, right. And I have, my early readers who I trust, and nobody liked that ending. And it wasn't the writing. They just said it didn't ring true. Each of them said in some variation it didn't ring true. So when 5 people tell you something, okay, even if you love it, maybe you should listen. So I was like, scrap that ending. And then I just ended it with her as a teenager, and ended it as true as I could think of it, which is when we're in bad situations as teenagers, we're stuck sometimes. We don't like what's going on at home, but where else are we going to go? And so I felt it was true to Olivia to end sort of where, she was stuck. But clearly Olivia I couldn't let her go. So I was writing instructions, not thinking about this narrator being any other character. Like, it was a new narrator, new story for me. But when she got to the part saying, about me, I have a bakery and I bake the best peach cobbler in town. And I was like, oh my God, it's Olivia, it's Olivia, it's Olivia. And then I just said, well, I'm going to go with it. What else would Olivia say? Knowing, her background. And then she says the thing, like, I said, I wasn't going to be like my mother, but here I am grubbing off the crumbs off of another woman's table. So it just showed up. And
But
so a
she's
lot
not
of writing for
chasing
me,
it, that manifestation on TikTok. I don't chase. I
yes,
let what comes to, like, it comes to her.
yes, that's it. And so for me, a lot of writing is discovery. I don't always know. But
Mhm.
I have to write to kind of figure it out. I don't tend to outline. So I didn't plan it, but I love that she showed up.
Yeah. So I noted earlier about How to Love a Physicist and how it's such a vulnerable tale about how to find and love yourself.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for that character?
I met a real life physicist and got the biggest crush on him.
Ah!
Just crushing hard.
Oh,
And
no.
so the crush inspired the first couple of lines. How do you make love to a physicist? It happens on Pi Day. Pi is something, and it's also irrational.
Yeah.
And I left that and I went on about my life. And then when it was time to develop the story, I was like, okay, I can go back to that. And then at that point, it stopped being a story of me and him, because there was no me and him, right? Nothing happened, nothing came of the crush. But
Yeah.
I love this idea of this woman loving this physicist.
Who's very
And
patient.
I'm sorry.
Very patient. Very
Yes,
patient
who's very
man.
pattion.
I would like to
And
find one.
and then I knew that they were going to make love on Pi Day, right? So I got my beginning and I got my end. Got to fill in that middle. So in the middle, I, was thinking about specifically things that they could talk about in terms of sex and religion, because that's something that I have over the course of my life, wanted to try and understand and reconcile. So the physicist that I had the crush on, he was somebody that helped me with the research. So I had found this astronomical phenomenon that I write about in the story that he later references. So I built that into the draft. And then I also wanted them to have a conversation about faith and religion and how does a scientist reconcile that. And so I interviewed him, and a lot of the things that he shared in the interview became part of their conversation. And then when I had the whole draft done, I sent it to him and I was like, did I get the science right? And did I get this perspective on science and religion right? And he just loved it. He was so excited and he was like, I got the science almost right. There was like something that was singular that I needed to make plural, but for the most part, I nailed it. And so I always guard his privacy. I will never tell anybody, who he is, but he's very proud that he knows that he, inspired the story.
I was like, oh, do men like this really exist?
Let me tell you, people slide in my
Heterosexuality
DMs.
really work for me?
People slide in my DMs and are like, is it this him? And they'll have a link to a Black physicist somewhere. I'm like, no, it's not him.
Girl, they really trying. They really trying to put two and two. They're trying to do the math. Oh no.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So this isn't really a question, but one of the readers wanted to thank you for giving a voice to the forgotten, caregivers caring for someone with whom they had a rocky relationship before
Yes.
needing round the clock support. And also,
Mhm.
because I get so many questions when I do YouTube videos. I did a video about Black women harming Black women accountability, and people were
Mm.
commenting about toxic mothers, and I'm like, I don't talk about it because I don't have that personal experience.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I had the gravitas for it, but I
Mm.
love that the book kind of it does it. There's several
Yeah.
chapters where we have difficult mothers.
Yes.
You like a difficult character,
Yeah.
dissatisfied
Yes.
mothers that didn't necessarily want to be mothers, people that
Mhm.
were decided to love their sons more than their daughters, as we
Mhm.
get in When Eddie Levert Comes. And it's just, how did you even come up with that? 'Cause, you
So
know, it
so
was
here's the thing. So the mother-daughter stuff, I didn't realize how deep it went until I was done with the manuscript. I was like, I guess I got issues. My mother died in 2005, and I think because we had a rocky relationship, but we were at peace when she passed away, and I think I kind of thought I had processed a lot of things, but it just kept coming up in the stories, and I wasn't intentional about that stuff, the mother-daughter stuff, right? But it was there. And so my next book is going to be another collection of short stories. I've abandoned the idea of a novel
But you're
for
so
now.
good at this. You know, this one.
And I'm going to do mothers and daughters. I'm going to, like, if I get really intentional about mothers and daughters, what do those stories look like? So that's what I'm working on now. But Eddie Levert specifically was exactly what you said. What is it like if you have to take care of somebody who was not good to you as a parent, and then on top of that they don't even remember it, and they don't really remember you? And so I didn't have that with my mother. She was in hospice the last 6 weeks of her life, and we were so close, and we healed, and we those were 6 weeks that I'm so glad we had to have together. But I was not her caretaker. She was in a hospice facility. But my mother had cared for my grandmother, and they had a difficult relationship. My grandmother cared for my great grandmother, and they had a difficult relationship, including some abandonment. And then my great grandmother had Alzheimer's. And so she didn't always know, who my grandmother was. And she would repeat things over and over again, and it would drive my grandmother nuts. And we were like, this is the disease. But my grandmother just couldn't accept it, and it bothered her to no end. So that's where I got the idea to give, mama this repetition, this thing she would say. Eddie Levert specifically, though, that was a shout out to my mom, because my mom's favorite group was the OJs. Loved them. And she got to go backstage one time, and she got to take a picture with all the OJs. And so I'm a huge OJ's fan. And so that's why I gave mama that. He's coming today. Eddie's coming. He's coming to get me.
The OJs is my father's favorite group.
Oh,
So I was like, this is so, because I grew up listening to so much
yeah.
of the OJs. And this is, and I especially love the moment where we talked about her converting and going back to the church. And, it didn't change her. It didn't make her more kind. And the church didn't even really support her.
Yeah.
Just, I can't wait to read the next set of short stories. I did not need this to be a novel. I didn't walk away and be like, I need Deesha to write a novel. No, I love this format, and we don't get this very often.
Yeah.
And we don't kind of get this accessibility in reading. I really love the work
Thank
you've
you.
done. So the very last question we have is about the TV series.
Yes.
And
yes.
I think somebody wants to know, is it going to be the retell? I just assumed it was going to be the retelling of this book, or is it going to be
about to have
stories?
Some fun? So it is not going to be an anthology series. Like, there are 9 stories in the collection. It's not going to be like 9 episodes or anything like that. It is going to be multiple episodes, but a single world that draws characters from each of the stories and puts them into a world together. And we have the freedom to move forward and backward in time. So there'll be some of what we have in the stories as they happen, but also going back. And so some of the adults that we see as adults in the book, we might see them as children. And the children we see them in the book, we're going to see them as adults, and moving back and forth. So I'm not wedded to just what's on the pages. We're building from there.
I'm so excited. There's so many books we've read these past 2 years that are becoming TV shows or films.
Yeah.
And I just can't wait. And I think, you deserve all the success. So I'm
Thank
so
you.
happy to see all the rewards you're receiving, because this book really is, it's that girl. Like, it's just, it's amazing. So I hope anybody, if you made it this far, go pick up the book. Get the syllabus from us. We have it on sale, and definitely deeply engage. There's so many discussions. Get the syllabus and then have a little book club with your homegirls, because this is the mimosa book. There's so much to talk about. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for sticking through with all our technical difficulties.
Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this for so long. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone, can have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye.